It wasn't just a movie. It wasn't just a romance. It was a moment that made the world believe in fairy tales again. It was a wealthy man, broken in his own ways. A young woman, judged by the world, but unafraid to shine. Together, Julia Roberts and Richard Gere turned Pretty Woman into more than a film. It became a symbol of love that dares to be different. Now, decades later, the question remains, what if their love story had never ended? When Pretty Woman first appeared on screen, no one expected it to become one of the most beloved love stories of all time. It was simple, yet powerful. A man named Edward Lewis, a billionaire who built his life around deals, numbers, and cold decisions, suddenly found his world turned upside down. He met Vivian Ward, a woman living a very different life, full of struggles and judgments from society. But inside her was a spark and honesty, a charm, a light that Edward had never seen before. Their story began as an arrangement, a deal. Edward needed company, and Vivian needed money. But like all great stories, the unexpected happened. Behind the glitz of Rodeo Drive, behind the high-class hotels and fancy dinners, something real was growing. We watched as Vivian transformed not just with new clothes, not just with a makeover, but with the dignity and self-respect she always carried within her. And Edward, a man who thought he could buy happiness, discovered that love can't be measured in contracts or business deals. Who could forget the unforgettable scenes? Vivian walking down the street in her red dress, the shopkeepers staring in awe at the woman they once mocked. The piano scene, where laughter and music became a language of love. And of course, the rooftop moment when Edward climbed up to Vivian's apartment, roses in hand, declaring his love, despite his fear of heights. That moment wasn't just Edward saving Vivian. It was Vivian saving Edward too, saving him from a life without color, without joy, without love. Pretty Woman wasn't just about two people finding each other. It was about transformation, about daring to love when the world says you shouldn't, about breaking the walls society builds around us. Julia Roberts' smile lit up the screen, and Richard Gere's quiet, reserved presence made the story believable and unforgettable. Together, they created magic. Even now, all these years later, people remember that balcony kiss. They remember the laughter, the tears, the music, and the magic of love that seemed impossible but somehow became real. And as the credits rolled, we all asked the same question. What happens next? Because deep down, everyone wanted more. More of Vivian and Edward. More of Julia and Richard. More of that kind of love that doesn't just belong to the screen but to the heart. Asterisk, but what if the story didn't end with the kiss on the fire escape? What if that was only the beginning? The world remembers the fairy tale. But life is never just a fairy tale. Love that shines brightest on the silver screen also has to survive the shadows of reality. And that's where the real story begins. Imagine Edward and Vivian after the credits rolled. The limousine drove away, the city lights sparkled, and for the first time, they believed they had found something worth fighting for. But what happens the next morning when the flowers dry and the city's noise returns? Edward still has his empire deals, meetings, and boardrooms filled with cold men who never cared about fairy tales. Vivian still has her heart, her spirit, and her past. A past that society never forgives easily. In this unwritten chapter, the love they share is tested not by chance, but by choice. Edward must learn that being a businessman and being a lover are two different things. That sometimes love doesn't fit into a schedule, doesn't follow the rules of negotiation. And Vivian, she must walk into a world that isn't ready for her, a world that whispers behind her back, a world that wonders if she belongs. Yet she holds her head high because she knows that real love is never about belonging to society. About belonging to each other, the story that could have been. The story that fans always dreamed of is not just about passion, it's about survival. Could Edward leave behind the cold walls of his business empire to build a home with Vivian? Could Vivian rise above the weight of judgment to show Edward that love is the only deal worth keeping? And in this imagined sequel, we see the truth. Love is not about the perfect moment, the red dress, or the balcony kiss. Love is about what? happens after the curtain falls. It's about two people who don't come from the same world, but decide day after day that their world is better when they are together. Because the magic of Pretty Woman was never just about the fairy tale, it was about the risk. The risk of two hearts stepping into the unknown, without a safety net, without guarantees. And in the what-if version of their story, that risk becomes their greatest adventure. Asterisk, the world remembers the kiss. But real love, it's not written in grand gestures alone. It's written in the quiet mornings, the heavy silences, and the storms no one sees. Edward and Vivian step into a life together, but the world around them isn't ready. Edward's boardroom whispers, she doesn't belong. Vivian's old world laughs, she will never fit in. And between the noise of judgment and expectation, two hearts begin to question. Can love survive when the world wants it to? Fail. Edward tries to protect her the only way he knows, by building walls of money, safety, and control. But Vivian doesn't want to be hidden away. She wants to live, to shine, to prove that love is more than a luxury. She challenges Edward to be more than a businessman, to be a man who can fight for something money cannot buy. The tension grows. Old habits pull at Edward late nights, broken promises, deals that consume him. Vivian faces rooms filled with cold stares where her laughter feels too loud, her past too visible. They love each other, yes? Love alone feels fragile under the weight of two different worlds. And yet, in the middle of this chaos, their hearts refuse to let go. Because when Edward looks at Vivian, he remembers the night she changed him, the night he realized he was lonely, not just alone. When Vivian looks at Edward, she sees the man who climbed a fire escape, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. In this unwritten sequel, the conflict is real, the stakes are higher, and the fairy tale is stripped of its glitter. But that's where love proves itself, not in perfection, but in persistence. The imagined story of Pretty Woman 2 is not about repeating the past. It's about confronting the truth, that love is not always a gentle song. Sometimes it is a battle. Cry. Sometimes it is messy, painful, terrifying, but it is always worth it. Because in the end, Edward and Vivian's love was never meant to be flawless. It was meant to be real. And real love is forever. Asterisk, it must have been love. But it's over now. The world remembers that line. A song that carried the ache of love lost. A song that played like a heartbeat beneath Pretty Woman. But what if the song wasn't just about endings? What if it was about beginnings too? Every note of that melody feels like Edward and Vivian's story, a love that was unexpected, a love that was fragile, love that almost slipped away. Yet somehow, against all odds, it stayed. That is the beauty of this imagined sequel. The song is no longer a farewell, it becomes a hymn of survival. It becomes the soundtrack of two people who learned that love is not about perfection, but about choice. Close your eyes and imagine. Julia Roberts' smile, Richard Gere's quiet gaze. Not as actors, not as characters, but as symbols of a love we all want to believe in. Their chemistry is timeless, like a song you can never forget. Even decades later, their faces remind us that fairy tales can outlast the screen, that some romances are too powerful to fade, and as the music swells, we understand. Pretty Woman was never just a story about wealth and transformation. It was about the courage to love someone the world said you shouldn't. It was about breaking walls, breaking rules, and finding freedom in the arms of another soul. So maybe, in this unwritten sequel, Edward and Vivian don't live a perfect life. Maybe they argue, maybe they stumble, maybe they fall. But every time, they rise again because they know love isn't about never breaking. It's about always mending. And in the final image we see it, the red dress, the balcony, the kiss that started it all.
Oh.
The screen fades, but the song continues. It must have been love. It still is. Because some love stories never end. They live forever in us. Julia and Richard, forever. Asterisk, love stories fade from theaters. Actors move on. The world forgets. But some stories refuse to die. They whisper through the years, carried in a single smile, a single glance, a single song. Pretty Woman was never just about Edward and Vivian. It was about every one of us who dares to believe that love can arrive when you least expect it. It was about the courage to choose someone not because the world approves, but because your heart does. That is why Julia Roberts and Richard Gere are more than actors in a film.
Ow.
They are symbols of a love that feels larger than life, yet close. Enough to touch. In this imagined forever, the fairy tale doesn't end with glass slippers or palaces. It ends with two people, flawed and human, choosing each other again and again. No matter the whispers, no matter the stares, no matter the years. Because real love is not about the perfect beginning, it's about the endless continuation. As the screen fades, the song lingers, the city lights dim, the balcony is empty. Yet we can still feel them there, hand in hand, smiling through the storm. Edward and Vivian, Julia and Richard. A love that lived on the screen, but somehow moved into our hearts, where it has stayed ever since. And so the curtain falls, not with an ending, but with a promise. A promise that some love stories are eternal. A promise that when we remember Pretty Woman, we are not just remembering a movie, we are remembering the kind of love we all hope to find. Forever asterisk? What is a love story if not a mirror? We watch Edward and Vivian, and in their eyes, we search for ourselves. We see the loneliness we hide, the hope we bury, the dream we keep alive in secret. That's why Pretty Woman was never just cinema, was a reminder that even the unlikeliest hearts can find each other. Decades later, their story still plays, not just on screens, but in us. Every time the song drifts through the air, every time Julia's laughter echoes in memory, every time Richard's quiet smile returns to mind, we are pulled back to that fire escape, to that kiss, to that moment when the impossible became real. But maybe the secret is this: their story was never meant to finish. Maybe that's why fans dream of Pretty Woman too, because deep down, we don't want the magic to fade. We want to believe that even after the lights go out, after the city falls, silent, their love continues. In some imagined world, they are still there, arguing, laughing, holding hands, growing old together. Two souls bound not by a script, but by something stronger, and so the film becomes more than a film. It becomes a legend. It becomes a piece of us. It whispers that love can begin anywhere, with anyone, and still last forever. It must have been love. But what if it still is? That is the gift Edward and Vivian left behind. That is the legacy Julia and Richard carry with them. It's not just a story on a screen, but an eternal echo, reminding us that love once found is never truly lost. Forever. Young, forever remembered. Forever theirs. Forever ours very generation has a love story that defines it. For some, it was Romeo and Juliet. For others, Jack and Rose. But for us, it was Edward and Vivian. Pretty Woman didn't just shape the 90s, it shaped the way we look at love itself. Think about it. Before Julia Roberts lit up the screen with her laugh. Before Richard Gere made silence speak louder than words. Romance films were safe, predictable, but this story broke the rules. It gave us a heroine society looked down on and turned her into a symbol of grace and strength. It gave us a businessman who believed he had everything, only to discover he had nothing without love. That's why even today we don't just watch Pretty Woman, we feel it. We carry Vivian's smile when we need courage. Remember Edward's fire escape climb when we wonder if grand gestures are still possible. And every time Roxette's It Must Have Been Love plays, our hearts ache for a love that is as risky as it is real. But here's the secret. The true legacy of Pretty Woman isn't just on the screen. It's in us, in the way we hope, in the way we dare to believe, in the way we keep asking, even after decades, what if there was more?
Oh, what if?
Love didn't end with the credits. That's why we dream of Pretty Woman too. Not because we need another film, but because we want permission to keep believing. We want Edward and Vivian to walk into our world again, to remind us that love is not about where you begin, but about where you choose to stay. And maybe that's why Julia Roberts and Richard Gere remain timeless. because they are not just actors. In a story, they are the mirror of every dreamer's heart, a reminder that even in a world full of doubt, love can still rewrite the ending. So when you watch this, it's not just their story you're remembering. It's yours. Because somewhere deep down, we all want our own Edward. We all want our own Vivian. We all want that moment when the impossible becomes real, and maybe, just maybe, that's what makes this love story eternal.